Hello again, welcome back to World War II TV, and I'm doing another reaction video. This is to another animated feature on YouTube. This time it covers the whole of Operation Overlord, and we are going to go through it, and I am going to make some comments. I have to say, again, I love the fact these companies are producing this kind of content. Lots of views, lots of people see it. Their interest in history is sparked by these kind of shows, so well done for doing it. I'm just doing my job, which is to take it apart and say, this could be better. So, here we go.
D-Day, June 6th, 1944. Months of effort have been building up to this day. Throughout England, 500,000 men have been gathered at staging areas to strike across the Channel as soon as the signal is given. Men from the United States, Britain, Canada, Australia, Belgium, Czechoslovakia, France, Greece, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, and Poland.
Right, my first problem. It starts well. I love the fact this is talking about that more than just the nations we know about took part. Yes, we know about the USA, Britain, and Canada. I'm really glad it's acknowledging these other countries. But the thing is, if you're going to acknowledge them in this way, then acknowledge them all. What about Luxembourg? What about India? What about South Africa? What about Rhodesia? So that's my first quibble. The other thing is they are showing these figures with army uniforms. Now, the majority, for example, of the Australians involved on D-Day were in the air or on ships. The same in New Zealand, Norway as well. There are some Norwegian commandos with number 10 Inter-Allied Commando in Europe. There are some in other kind of commander units, but this is a bit misleading. It's suggesting that the armies of these countries are landing forces under their own command as part of Operation Overlord, which isn't really the case. If we're going to include people who are participating from different countries, then the list is almost endless because you've got individual pilots from a whole host of countries. We've got the Caribbean countries, we've got Jamaica. Not just the Eastern European countries, the people who had escaped from Eastern Europe of serving with Allied forces. I like what it's doing. It's trying to make D-Day an international event, which it was, but it's not including everybody. And it's giving the impression that these are army units coming ashore on beaches, which of course they weren't. We will continue.
Today, we'll be telling the American story, as best it can be told in a few short minutes, and over the coming weeks, thanks to the generous support of Wargaming, we will tell the story of 3 of the other major players involved. But that story begins with a dinner in Tehran in 1943. For the first time, the leaders of the most powerful Allied nations, the United States, the USSR, and the British Empire, met in one room. For years, Stalin, his nation battered by the Nazi invasion and bearing the brunt of the human cost of the war against Germany, had pressed the Allies to open up a second front to the war by invading France. The British had pushed back, arguing for operations in North Africa, and then an assault on Italy. But now, with the USSR winning on the Eastern Front, the demands from Stalin became harder to deny, and simultaneously, everyone started to think of the post-war settlement. If the Allies won without British and American troops liberating Western Europe, how could they stop the USSR from claiming huge swaths of land, and perhaps even, at least politically, dominating the continent? And so an agreement was made out in the deserts of Iran. The Western powers would open up a second front by invading France in May of 1944.
Right, okay, quite a lot to unpack with this. The first thing is, I like the fact it's talking about conferences. Conferences aren't terribly sexy, folks. When we're talking about World War II, we want to know about landings and commando missions, and groups of middle-aged and elderly politicians meeting around a table aren't inherently sexy. So I'm liking the fact it's talking about the conferences. However, it's implying that the only reason Britain and America, and we should mention Canada, are invading France is because the Russians have told us to, which is not true. Yes, Churchill had absolutely pushed back about a second front in France. He wanted to go through the soft underbelly of Europe in the Med and Italy and all that, and that's true. But to think that the British and Americans, Canadians haven't been considering and wanting and planning for a second front within Europe is nonsensical, okay? There are operations proposed in 1942, 43 Roundup being one of them, for example, where at that point, the reason they weren't unfolded is that there weren't enough landing craft, weren't enough troops. It was considered it was too early to do it. So this is heavily implying that the only reason that we wanted to land in France was because the Russians and Stalin told us to, which is just not the case. I mean, what on earth are we gathering a force of 1 million plus infantry units and armor units personnel in the UK if it is not to launch them somewhere into Europe. Now, there are some debates about where we're going to go. Is it going to be Normandy? Is it going to be Calais? Is it conceivably going to be Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands? But a second front is already going to happen. The Allies are wanting one. Yes, Churchill's got concerns about the location, but the planning for this has been going on for ages. So this is really quite misleading.
Plans were drawn up. An amphibious operation of this size had never been tried. Men and material would have to be drawn back from around the world. New technologies would have to be invented. Engineering feats previously only discussed in conference rooms would have to be put to the test under wartime conditions. But the first decision that had to be made was where to land. There were two possible targets: Calais, the closest point in Europe to England, or Normandy, one of the farthest on the Channel coast. Calais was the sane, sensible place to land, but it had two notable disadvantages. First, terrain in which you could easily get bogged down, and second, the fact that it was the sane, sensible place to land.
Okay, now, yes, it is the obvious place to land, so therefore that makes it less attractive. What the hell is it talking about with a terrain problem, with that picture of the guy on the slope there? I have no idea what that means at all. The Calais region of France is pretty much flat. There's no floods like we had to contend with in Normandy. There's no bocage. There's no big, massive, great hills. I don't know what it's talking about when it says there's a problem with the terrain in Calais. That just makes no sense. I have no idea what that means. Also, they are the two obvious positions from which a decision was made, Calais or Normandy, but as I just said a minute or two ago, they weren't the only possibility. This is presenting it as it is those two options, and there are no other options. There are other options that were dismissed. So it's oversimplifying the whole thing.
Reviewing the battle plan, Eisenhower and Montgomery were in agreement. They wanted the element of surprise, with the possibility of being able to rush off the beaches. So the decision was made. Normandy it would be. But this would require one of the greatest counterintelligence operations ever attempted to keep the secrets safe, not to mention the equipment and the manpower on an even greater scale. Entire harbors had to be fabricated, which could be shipped over from England.
Yep.
More landing craft needed time to roll off the factory lines, so the operation was delayed until June. Finally, the day arrives, June 4th, 1944. Planes prep, final drills are run through, tens of thousands of men board ships for the invasion, and then the rain starts to roll in. Soon it becomes a storm. Ferocious waves sweep the channel. Clouds completely block the sky. High winds buffet any craft that ventures on sea, land, and especially air. Eisenhower is forced to make the decision. The attack must be delayed. Rain continues to pour the next day. A council of Allied commanders is called. If they delay again, they won't be able to launch until July. They need to do the channel crossing at night. They need to do commando raids and minesweeping when the unsuspecting Germans will have the fewest patrols out. But for a crossing of this
I'm not really sure what it means by commando raids. There had been commando raids, of course, before Operation Overlord, Churchill setting Europe ablaze. We've talked about on my channel, and there's the Bruneval assault and gliders, Operation Aquatint. There's commando raids, there's SAS raids, but there are commandos coming ashore as part of the invasion on June the 6th, but they're not commando raids. They are part of an amphibious assault. So that's a bit weird, if I'm being honest.
Magnitude, they need nearly full moon visibility. Even if they did decide to brave a launch without the full moon, tidal conditions wouldn't be right for another 2 weeks. What do? They've got thousands of men already holed up on boats, getting seasick and nervous and just plain stir-crazy. They've already started moving equipment and forces into staging areas which can clearly only be targeting one place, Normandy. And they've had to alert enough people up and down the chain as to the nature of...
Well, you see, that's gone a bit weird again there, because it just a minute ago talked about the deception campaign, and therefore it's talking about the fact there's all these troops mobilized on the southwest coast, coast of England, ready to do the invasion of Normandy. But it mentioned that in the deception plan earlier, but now it's not mentioning the fact that Fusag, the American assault force to land on Calais that doesn't actually exist, Calais exists, not the assault force, that is over in East Anglia and the southeast of England, they are still, as far as the message we're sending the enemy is concerned, they are still there. So it's a bit misleading.
Of the operation that with each passing day, the odds of keeping their landing location a secret plummet. But to cross in this weather, that would be madness. Then a captain is ushered in. He's an RAF meteorologist, and he is about to make what may well be the most consequential weather report of all time. He says he believes it's going to be clear on the 6th. Eisenhower nods. The operation is a go.
Minor detail. Group Captain Stagg was in the RAF. Technically, he was actually a scientist who was given a nominal rank within the Royal Air Force to serve in a military capacity, but he wasn't, he wasn't a flyer per se, but he was definitely RAF. So he would have worn a blue uniform, and he was a group captain, not a captain. By saying he's a captain and having the animation there with a brown unit, the implication is he's Army, he's Royal Air Force.
6,000 ships begin to steam across the channel. Minesweepers fan out ahead of them, clearing a path. For weeks, the Allied forces have bombed the German Air Force in the region nearly to oblivion. No enemy interceptors exist to spot the waves of gliders and
well, there are enemy interceptors, aren't there? This is a big rabbit hole we go down here, but this idea that it's perpetuated there is no Luftwaffe anywhere near Normandy needs to be kind of stopped right now. There is a Luftwaffe, there are aircraft. Saying no aircraft, no interceptors is giving an indication of the situation in Normandy that is not what reality tells us it was.
Transport planes carrying 17,000 airborne troops. The ships won't reach the beaches until dawn, but the airborne infantry has night work to do. First in are the Pathfinders, the men whose job it is to light the drop zones for all the other parachute infantry. Of the 4 planes carrying these Pathfinders, one overshoots their target, another has to bail before ever getting to France, and the remaining 2 kept most of their signaling gear in the ditched plane, leaving them desperately trying to signal the paratroopers by waving flashlights at the passing airplanes.
Okay, so it's got very muddled here. Great kudos to the animators and the historians here for mentioning the role of the Pathfinders. That's really good. They were an important element there. But there were more than 4 planes. I mean, there were 6 drop zones, 3 for the 101st, 3 for the 82nd. Each have teams of Pathfinders and the security teams who are jumping at the same aircraft to provide security, hence in the name, for the Pathfinder teams. So there's a lot more than 4 aircraft. So I don't know what it's talking about here. Is it talking about 4 from one of the drop zones? Because that's kind of the number we're talking about, sort of a few aircraft per drop zone. It's muddying the waters here. Yeah, so that's more than what they state. And yes, they are getting it across correctly that the Pathfinders are having issues finding and getting the drop zones lit and the beacons working, but it's not just 4 aircraft, folks.
Paratrooper drop goes even worse. Scattered by enemy anti-aircraft fire and blinded by low clouds, paratroopers jump from altitudes that are either too high, leaving them drifting slowly, unable to do anything but watch as enemy guns spit shrapnel up at them, or too low, breaking bones on landing as their parachutes don't have enough time to slow their fall.
Well, again, a little bit confusing here. I don't know that very many aircraft were flying too high. The universal problem is too low, if anything. I don't think I've ever read an account of someone drifting down for too long. Maybe occasionally, but the more common is, as it said there in the second part of that, the jumping too low and causing problems of injury on landing. That's good, but too high, that's a bit weird.
They're scattered all over, many of them landing miles from their drop zones, some landing in marshes or rivers, others being slaughtered as they drop right into the middle of the enemy. It was a harrowing and confusing night of chaotic firefights and desperate small unit actions. But the more veteran of the American airborne troops, groups like the Screaming Eagles and the 505th...
Oh, now you see, it's got very muddled now. The more veteran of the airborne units. Okay, so it's got things very confused here. So the 2 divisions each have 3 parachute infantry regiments attached to them or integral to the divisions, and the breakdown of whether they're attached or as part of it doesn't beyond the scope of this video. The 505th are the regiment within the 82nd that have jumped already. Some of them have done the previous jumps, Sicily, Italy, what have you. Yes, although there are, of course, lots of replacements. The 101st Airborne, however, all of 3 of their PIRs are inexperienced, well-trained, but they have never jumped before, bar the odd officer who's come in from another unit to change over. Harry Welsh, famously in E Company 506, had been in the 82nd. So there are the odd person in the 101st who's had a bit of combat, but this is incredibly misleading. The 505th on the right of that image there are a regiment within the 82nd Airborne, and they have had, some of them have had combat experience, but this has just got it wrong, folks. And even when, not that this video does, they say the 82nd has combat experience. The two other PIRs, the 507th and 508th, have not had combat experience. So basically, if we're talking about the American Airborne, of the 6 PIRs, and then you have the parachute field artillery batteries and the other units, the engineers, and a very, very small percentage of them have really seen combat before. I mean, over the entire 2 divisions, it's going to be about tops, about 20%. So the 101st are not a veteran division. They earn their spurs in Normandy and beyond.
Managed to pull together to capture crucial road junctions, communication points, and bridges, and even destroyed some of the artillery batteries that would imperil the landing at Normandy. And they would hold fast, delaying or preventing any...
I don't know why it says at Normandy. I mean, everything's in Normandy. I mean, when they're talking about the artillery batteries, I guess they're talking about the famous one, Brecor Manor behind Utah Beach. So say Utah Beach, don't say Normandy. Everything's Normandy. Yeah, a bit lazy script writing.
Counterattack that might sweep the impending invasion back into the sea. Then there's the initial bombardment. Allied bombing runs go astray, causing massive damage to the civilian centers in Normandy, but doing little to weaken the dug-in German positions. As dawn breaks, though, the Allied gunners can finally see their targets, and the bombardment becomes far more effective, softening up the beach for the initial assault.
I don't know where it's going with that. The bombers had now been. I mean, they are coming when they're coming. There's not a second mission of bombers, really. Well, people will argue there are some. Is it talking about fighter bombers now coming in after the weather has cleared? I don't know. And again, it's just oddly worded, and it's a bit too simplistic, and it needs more detail there. And I'm not going to unpack it all because we'll be here all week.
But there's little time remaining until the troops' scheduled landing. At 6:30 a.m. on June 6, 1944, the klaxons sound, and the assault craft are released. They plow through the chop. Men huddle.
It's a minor point. I don't know there were any klaxons sound. I mean, the whole thing, that's it metaphorically. Metaphorically, there's an alert given that we're going to go down out from the lower decks and board the landing craft. But I don't know there's a single. I mean, there's all the ships are going to do their klaxons. I mean, it's weird. That's a weird phrase.
In their tin shells as German fire pours down, sinking entire landing craft to the bottom of the sea just off the Normandy coast. Then the assault craft hit the beach, ramps drop, and men charge out. But
see, it's obviously talking about Omaha now, and I know it said at the beginning it's talking about the American landings, but this isn't happening universally. It's not been clear which beach it's talking about. It hasn't specified Omaha in the script there.
On Utah Beach, things have already gone horribly. The men look around them, and the terrain's all wrong. They've landed on the wrong beach. Luckily for the Americans, the oldest man in the invasion, and the only general to actually join these ground troops, Teddy Roosevelt Jr., happens to have landed with them.
Only general to join these ground troops. Yes, specifically in that group there, having that discussion. It was a under fire discussion, folks, on Utah Beach. But Barton, the actual divisional commander of the 4th Division, is going to be ashore a few minutes later. You've got General Cota coming ashore, assistant divisional commander of the 29th on Omaha Beach. There's General Pratt, who is the 101st Airborne assistant divisional commander. He's coming in by glider. It's not precise enough about its language here. He's the only general in that area at that moment, but he is not, folks, the only general who is stepping foot into Normandy that morning.
The local commanders ask him what they should do, and living up to his namesake.
What does local commanders mean there? Does that mean that they're... You mean... Am I being too picky? Local commanders sounded... To me, if you say a local commander, that's what you'd apply to the Germans. The Germans are the local commanders. Does it mean the commanders who are there? I mean, you're talking about people like Colonel Van Fleet, who eventually commanded divisions and was an incredible general that went on for the Korean War and what have you. But it's really weird language. I'm sorry to the makers of this if I'm being critical, but it's just really weird language.
He simply responds, "We'll start the war from right here." He correctly assessed that the beach that they'd landed on was actually a better, more easily takeable landing point than the one that the senior staff had assigned them. In a miracle of heroism and logistical coordination, he managed to reroute the entire Utah Beach invasion force to his location, direct the battle, and continuously rally the men as he walked the beach with his cane, waving his pistol. His new Utah Beach would be the first beach successfully overrun, and for his actions there, he would be awarded the Medal of Honor. Omaha, though, was a different story. Here, the pre-landing bombardment had been even less effective. The seas were choppy, landing craft took on water, and men tried to bail with their helmets. Some of the landing craft sank, and those that landed were filled with retching, seasick men. Much of the armored support that was supposed to follow them foundered in the waves, or simply got picked off.
If you see my other video about the Omaha Beach animation, I go into more detail about the tanks. But it said there that the tanks are supposed to follow them. Technically, the tanks are supposed to be there at the same time or ahead of the infantry. That's why they land when they do, to provide that fire support. So in theory, when infantry are moving up the beach, there's already a steel curtain of Sherman tanks in front of you there. So again, I'm being really, really picky, but it's not really correct.
Off as they hit the shore. Soon, the men were all pinned down against a small shingle of land that provided what little cover there was to be.
A small shingle of land. What does that mean? It's talking about the shingle wall. Now, this is something I talk about a lot and have done over the years. Shingle is a word used differently by the various speakers of English. As an Englishman, you may have noticed I'm English. Shingle to us is pebbles on a beach. River rocks, people might say from the other side of the Atlantic. Shingle, Americans hear the word shingle, they think of roofing shingles, or we would say roofing tiles. So on Omaha Beach, after the sand, which is kind of the bit where the water laps up, then for most of Omaha Beach was a big pile of these smooth pebbles that formed a wall because they were pushed up by the waves. Then beyond that is in some places of the beach, but not all of them, a stone or concrete wall. So I guess it's meaning the shingle wall, but it's the language here is weird.
Be found on the beach. Many of the units had taken heavy casualties, and much of the command staff was dead. With units getting washed ashore in the wrong places or scattered in the desperate scramble to try to get to the small ridge of sand that served as cover, the assault had become hopelessly disorganized.
So the small ridge of sand, it's meaning the shingle wall. It's getting its terminology mixed up, which is probably due to the fact that the writers of this haven't actually been to Normandy. They've not looked at the terrain, and they've misunderstood the language terminology, because even American authors will use shingle in the English sense of the word, not the American sense of the word. And sometimes you need to have that kind of glossary at the beginning to explain what you mean by terms, which is something I would like to think I would do on my channel and on my tours, is when a word comes up, make sure the audience understand what that word means so that we're all singing off the same hymn sheet.
The second wave met with much the same fate. Hopelessly bogged down, withdrawal from Omaha Beach was considered, but it was the vital linking point between the British and American forces. As the day wore on, a number of Ranger units began to rally and scaled the bluffs, finally managing to assault German positions on the heights. At the same time...
Okay, so well done for crediting the fact the 2nd and 5th Battalion Rangers made a significant contribution to the western end of Omaha Beach, but it wasn't only Ranger units. In fact, there were breaks off the beach before the Rangers had, notably L Company 16th Infantry up the other end of the beach, off Fox Green, up the F1 draw, Spalding E16th. There's other units coming off on Easy Red. So yes, the Rangers have a key part of this, but it's missing the other units that also contributed incredibly to this breakthrough.
Several of the naval ships came dangerously close to the beach to provide more effective support fire just as the German ammunition began to run out. Even after all...
The implication that there's some kind of correlation between the naval fire starting and the Germans running out of ammunition, as if they are in some way connected, is false, folks. The Germans are running out of ammunition because they don't have enough ammunition, because ultimately the Rommel plan, which is to stop the invasion at the water's edge, needs pretty much everybody who lands on that beach to die in those first few minutes. And although the losses were very, very severe on Omaha and some other first wave landings, the foothold was established. And if you've got machine guns or mortars, and if you've ever been into some of the bunkers behind Omaha Beach and you see the recesses they have for the amount of ammunition that can be stored, and it's not that much. So ammunition is running out on Omaha Beach because ammunition is running out on Omaha Beach if you're German. It has no direct correlation with the American naval destroyers coming in closer. That's, again, slightly ambiguous script writing.
All of this, Omaha Beach wasn't truly cleared by the end of the 6th. But as the sun began to set on those bloodied beaches, it was clear that the American forces were there to stay. Join us next time as we join the British for their covert efforts to keep the biggest invasion in history a secret.
Okay, so I just want to conclude by saying that it made the distinction there between we've done the American story and now we're doing the British story in another show. I don't like this. And the reason I don't like this is all 5 beaches were international on some level, okay? On Omaha Beach, there are RAF units coming ashore. The landing craft assault are often crewed by British or maybe Danish or Dutch landing craft coxswains. There are some of the ships that are off Omaha Beach aren't American. They're British ships, they're French ships, there are other nation ships. Off Sword Beach, there's a Norwegian ship. I think we are doing a disservice to the spirit of Operation Overlord by always talking about a beach being of a certain nation. Yes, absolutely. Predominantly, the troops coming ashore on Omaha Beach are American, but not only. Yes, predominantly the troops on Juno Beach are Canadian, but there are British troops there as well. Yes, predominantly the troops on Sword are British, but there's also French commandos and other units there as well. Utah Beach, for example, a couple of days after D-Day, 30 AU come ashore. We've done a show about 30 Assault Unit on our channel. They include British commandos who are looking for German technology. They were famously commanded by Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond books, blah, blah, blah. But it's not good to keep reinforcing this idea that I'm doing a show about the American landings for an American audience because they know about they want to hear about American units. I'm doing a show about the British forces for a British audience, or doing a book. It's an international thing, folks. I can't bang this drum loudly enough. The way this is presenting is we've now done the American story, now do the British story. It's not that simple, folks. Each of the beaches is an international landing force. That is how it is. That's just what the story was. So it's nationalistic. It's not acknowledging our strength. It's not acknowledging the strength of the Allied force, which was that we were all working together. I'm recording this video with awful things happening in the Ukraine right now, and the world's response is one of unity. The message of Operation Overlord should be one of unity, countries coming together with different political ideologies to defeat the Third Reich and Hitler. There are countries coming that are one religion or less religious or atheistic, or they're left-wing leaning or they're right-wing leaning. They're from monarchies, they're from republics, democracies. Some have had an elected leader, some have had a war leader who's been forced into the position because the point is they're all coming together, unified to overthrow Hitler and his Third Reich and liberate the countries of Europe. And we must get away from this idea of it being national. This nation is here, this nation is here. It's lazy. So there we are. I'll stop ranting now. I just want to reaffirm, I do like the fact that these people are making history come alive. They're doing it in a creative way for younger people to watch. Just watch your script. And maybe, here's the thing, if you are a YouTuber and you make these kind of history content, run your script through by someone before you do it. Send it to a historian, not necessarily me. I'm on the low rung of the chain. But contact someone like John McManus, James Holland, these other historians who are out there, Alex Kershaw, Peter Caddick Adams, and just say, look, I'm doing a script for a show. Can you have a read of this? Make sure I've not made any howlers. Make sure I'm fair to everybody. I'm sure they do it. It doesn't take long to read it. You know, it makes for a better product. It makes that we're sharing better history. There we are then. I'm going to leave it with you. I quite enjoy doing this. I quite enjoy kind of being a bit bitchy, really, about history. So if you like this, you want to see more of this, let me know. Leave the messages there below. Subscribe to the channel. Share what we're doing on social media. And watch some of our proper history, because these reaction shows are just me being a bit angry, although I do it with a smile, I like to think. And if you have wondered who is this guy? Why is he talking about this stuff? I have lived in Normandy. I said it earlier, for 20 years. I have been guiding people for a long time here. I've got a massive, great library of books about the landings. I have been studying it for a long time. I've got archives online. I kind of do know what I'm talking about with regards to Normandy, hence why I feel confident enough to rip these videos apart. But I'll do others. I might do ones on other battles in World War II or films. Who knows? But anyway, keep watching. Thanks, everybody, for your attention. Cheers.